Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Memo Creative Festival podcast, where we discuss big ideas around how creativity and culture shapes the way we live, work, and connect. I'm one of your hosts, Taylor Pfeiffer, and I'm here with my co-host, Brooke Hoffus, and today we will be interviewing Gillian Pinder. Gillian is an experienced innovator who combines deep technical expertise in sportswear mechanics with an athlete-centered R&D approach. She has contributed to Olympic gold medal winning footwear and helped establish research programs for historically overlooked populations at Adidas and Arc'teryx. Currently, she is a part of the Arc'teryx Advanced Concepts team, where she works on the future of mountain sports products, applying insights, biomechanics, product and field testing to shape the next generation of gear. Gillian is also the founder of Bearwear, which is a barefoot footwear company which reimagined orthotic compatible design to support natural movement. And I'm so excited to talk more about that one. That's super interesting to me. She has also led that company from a problem-solving definition through to product launch and sales, driven by this sort of desire to improve accessibility and long-term engagement within the physical activity in sport. Across all these ventures, Gillian connects engineering precision to user experience, where she pushes product innovation toward greater inclusivity, functionality, and impact. So welcome to the podcast, Gillian.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So good to have you. We're going to ask you a few questions today, and we're just going to let the conversation flow. We're just really curious to start things off. What sort of sparked your interest in this world of sports engineering? Was this something you sort of always set out to do? Like maybe you're a little girl and you're like, one day I want to grow up and be a sports engineer? Or did you start doing something different, which sort of led you to where you are now?
Well, my dad is an engineer, so I think that maybe some of it, but he's a civil engineer, so quite different. But I grew up playing soccer primarily. I mean, lots of sports, but soccer at a high level and at university. And then was in engineering. I think originally maybe I wanted to do law. My mom's a lawyer, so it was one of the two. And then realized that I missed math and science and I wanted to stay there. So I ended up in engineering, was playing soccer for the Huskies. And then I don't quite remember how I discovered that sports engineering was a field. But mechanical engineering is all about, engineering of moving things. And so, biomechanics is kind of a specific branch that U of S doesn't necessarily focus on within engineering, but it seemed like I could kind of parlay one into the other. I think fairly early on in my degree, we had a guest speaker that was a U of S grad who ended up at Nike and their innovative kitchen there. And so I'm sure that was pretty inspiring, and it could have been from that moment that I just had decided. But whatever moment that was, basically after that, it was kind of all focus in this space. And I was really lucky. There was a professor that was fairly new at the time, Dr. Ma, and he had sports engineering background. So he had worked at the Oval doing speed skating suits and different things with crash pads, and was working on some concussion stuff. So I connected with him, and we ended up working together for quite a while. And I'm really grateful for his influence, and I'm sure without that, it would have felt pretty far away.
That's amazing. I heard you say that you missed math and science, and I can't relate to that personally. Maybe a weirdo that way, but my high school experience was much different. I think I rejected those classes and I tried to find my people in maybe the wood shop or something like that. So engineering is very tangible as much as it is tactical and mathematical and scientific. Is there sort of this balance in your industry and what you're doing where you get to work with like real materials and sort of like let it organically push you in a direction, or you're like feeling the materials and putting things together? Or is it much more like methodical and mathematical, or both?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Like the engineering side of it is still quite engineering-y, in that we're coming up with test methods, we're conducting tests, we're looking at results. So it's quite methodical in that sense and quite technical. But it's so much removed from what would be like a textbook example, where they're not often kind of rigid beams. You're not looking at, a perfect, a system within a vacuum. It's very much like applying technical information or theory to things that don't quite kind of fit within the box. And so there's a lot of, I would say that's where the soft edges are. It's more, okay, how do we test this thing that is really soft and flexible, where you're trying to do, a 3-point bend test, but it's on something that, is almost outside of the sensitivity of your Instron, which is like a typical kind of engineering tool. So there's things like that. So we're not so much designers, although we can contribute a lot to the design. But in terms of what you said around like haptics and feel, it's much more like, what does that mean in terms of how might you like quantify what that sensation is? Or when somebody says, oh yeah, this is really comfortable, how do you unpack that? And then
Right.
how do you measure it? Or how do you, even if it is subjective, how do you make that process of capturing that feedback really repeatable? So it's still kind of on the test method side for a lot of it, but it's also how do you do that in a controlled space? More theoretical, how do you do that out in the field? How do you do that, in the mountains? So that's where it gets like really fun. So definitely more atypical from a lot of engineering professions that can be operations based. This is definitely like R&D based, but that's still kind of one of the typical branches of engineering.
I'm really curious about the testing methodologies that you kind of have at Arc'teryx and probably Adidas too. Is there a point in which you feel like you've tested something too much? Because I'd imagine like you're like testing, and it can go on and on and on, and you're probably learning a lot. But is there like a certain like saturation point where you're like, okay, we've now collected all the data that we need, we're done, or like can that be a runaway train sometimes
Well,
and you just keep
it can,
testing?
yeah, it can be more runaway train because there's always questions. I think particularly like I've always been on the R&D arm of these companies. And so we're not doing a lot of like repeat development or tweaks or new iterations season after season. So you're not really testing a lot of the same stuff over and over. You're always kind of trying to answer a new question, but you can definitely kind of over engineer making everything very objectively measured, because sometimes it's like, well, okay, even if we do measure this and get this result, like, does that translate to something the athlete's going to be aware of, or is it going to change their experience? So you can go a little bit deep. But for example, like, Arc'teryx the company is based off of harness. And that's not the that I'm currently doing, but that's, very serious technical engineering, because you're looking at, failure mechanisms and you're testing buckles and stuff like that. So I don't think you can do too much testing of new components, especially when people's lives depend on it. It has been kind of a little bit less critical, I guess, in that sense. So the tests can be a little bit more creative, I guess, because they're not all based on standards. You can sometimes get a little too deep in the weeds of does this end up applying to the ultimate product?
Are you able to dive a bit more into what testing looks like, just so for people can understand the different types of testing that you do for the products that you're engineering?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the specifics, but I think in general, it can be a real range from a typical mechanical engineering lab that you might see at a ton of different companies that are developing either like a new material, a new system. Kind of you imagine how those components might move, and there's basically a test for that. So if it's things that bend, things that are pulled on, things that are compressed at the material and the component level, it can be anything kind of from that all the way to basically the furthest on the other end would be athlete in the field, objective and subjective. So that can be, measuring product performance on body, measuring environmental conditions. There's a lot of creativity that our team is utilizing now to figure out how we do more and more kind of in the mountains, because that's really ground truth of how things are being used. But then you introduce a lot of challenges with repeatability and, condition, like, and athletes are inherently very different. So there's different challenges between doing it inside a controlled space and out. But yeah, it can be quite variable, and a lot of the job within being, an engineering innovation is coming up with those methods. Oftentimes, there's some things you can purchase, but it doesn't quite fit what you're trying to do with it, or it doesn't exist at all, and you build something custom. So there's everything from really standard things, quality type of tests, and those would be quite standardized. But a lot of the on-athlete performance testing, that's where a lot of our innovation actually is more in like that process than it is in, being the designers of the final thing.
That's really interesting. That's really cool. And not to pivot like too much from the testing, but thinking about the brands that you have worked with so far, like Adidas, and now you're at Arc'teryx. What are some interesting things about working for these really big major companies that people might not particularly know about?
I think the innovation that goes on behind the scenes would be one thing, just because so much of it never makes it to market. Like we're of the kooky kind of people working on in quite a small team often, and it is trying to look like way out into the future and do things in ways that haven't been done. And I think with any kind of innovation like that, the wins are fewer than the losses. And so there's tons of learnings, and sometimes the things you'll work on will trickle down into other product that make it out. But more of the inline teams, those are the teams that are designing and creating the products that evolve seasonally and are always on the shelves and things that you would see more of. But at least with the companies I've worked with, it's really cool to see that there is this dedication to having these teams that are really trying to kind of influence the future of what's possible and be okay with not all of them, being commercially viable. Not that they may not be successful, but sometimes they're also just really unique to what the company is doing. And so to make it within something that company can bring to market is quite challenging. So that's one. I think the kind of, again, most of my lens is through innovation, but I think the push to be a bit more inclusive, the movement around designing for women
Mm-hmm.
it has changed even in the short time that I've been. I think just with like the explosion of women's sport, the business case is there more than ever, even though, I think we should have been doing some of this stuff a long time ago, but there's a lot of momentum. So that's really cool. So I think because the time it takes to get a new product to market, especially within these big companies, is so long, some of that feels a bit slow to action, even though teams have been working on them, years ago. It's kind of, we'll just, I think, start to see more and more of that hit the shelves because that development calendar is just so long. So I'm happy for that to start to happen and then that momentum to continue. But I think it was important for me working in these places that those types of kind of values, I guess, are things that the brands are investing in.
Yeah. Totally. How do you feel like, because you mentioned you played for the Huskies for soccer, how do you feel like that's impacted the work that you're doing, I guess, right now at Arc'teryx and like things that you learned in that stage of your life and bringing it into kind of like more of your work and engineering process? I'm curious how that kind of impacts your work today.
Yeah, I mean, it helped a lot when I was at Addie because I was working on women's soccer stuff.
Yeah.
So that was huge because it was fairly common, although not everybody had, deep sports backgrounds, but lots did. And so you're the person who's like the technical expert in your field in engineering, but also the expert in the sport. And so you can just draw on so much of that experience.
Yeah.
That's less of the case for me at Arc'teryx. I love to snowboard. That's probably my closest tie, but I'm not a climber, but I have the opportunity to work with like incredible climbers. My closest colleague right now, went to the Olympics. We have others that have won awards in alpine. Like they're just like incredible,
Cool.
but also quite integrated into the team. And so that's invaluable, I think, to be able to learn from them. So it's less that I can do both and just like draw off my own experience and be like, well, this is the problem when I played it. Oh yeah, and we did this weird thing and
Right.
we had to tape up our socks because it like just like
Yeah.
stuff that you just know, whereas when you're not that, I think that's just like such a critical piece to like then make sure that you're working closely with someone who does have that because it's such an easy access source of like, oh yeah, this was an issue and this was an issue.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories around that at all? Like, is there any well-known athletes that you worked with, or even people on your team for that matter? Do you have any stories around that that you could share with us, whether that's like a pro athlete or somebody who's been to the Olympics, and like how are they typically involved in the design process if they aren't working at Arc'teryx, right? Just curious about all of that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix, I guess, depending on, the accessibility of the athlete. Like at Addie, they have some of the biggest in the whole world, and we're not, at least I wasn't. There's the head office is in Germany, and so I'm not totally sure. I think they had more access to some of the really big athletes, especially that were playing over in Europe there. But I mean, I'm not calling Messi every other day to talk about what should be new in cleats. We would do kind of insight gathering. Like I said, we're kind of always trying to mine for authentic athlete problems and hear it directly from them. I did have the opportunity to kind of meet and work with some people that I was definitely in awe of, but it was less of that frequency. I think you may be more design with those, like the super, super pinnacle, you kind of design with them in mind and maybe something that they're going after, or they're a bit more of a muse, and then you can test with them. Like a boot that I worked on that just came out was tested with Trinity Rodman. And so they're still involved, but it's different levels, I guess. And so, the ones I alluded to that I get to work with a lot now, that's probably my favorite. You can chat with the best in the world, and it's just a lot easier to do that. And then when they sit on your team, it's that much better. But yeah, my colleague right now is Alana Yip, and she went to Tokyo Olympics as a sport climber, and I just get to pick her brain all the time. And Quentin Roberts is another one. He's on expeditions all over the place, and it's like, okay, what happens in this situation? And like just to be able to, because joining in the company, it's like I really wanted to build up my knowledge of just everything climb and all of the different aspects of it and disciplines and sub-disciplines, and then to kind of ask more deep questions than just, what would you like to see in this new thing? But like, okay, what is the mindset when you're in this situation? Or what do you think the next generation is doing? How is it changing the sport? What about climate change, rock condition? Like just kind of really go deep, but with somebody who is so knowledgeable. I've had some kind of star moments, but less in the creative process, a little bit more in, I guess, in being ambassadors. after you've created something.
And in that creative process, how does it work with these elite athletes? Are they typically like heavily involved in that design and engineering process of a product? Or can you explain a little bit of that relationship that you kind of
It can
contribute
vary. Like
together?
sometimes it's insights. So sometimes you have some time with them and they can share some problems or some ideas. Sometimes it's testing where we have the product on them specifically, gathering data. Sometimes the product has been designed for them in mind and then they're testing it kind of later on in the process. It does vary. I think my favorite is if they're pretty ingrained and they can provide the insights and then also be the touchstone along the way. I think that's kind of where the best results come from.
Well, it sounds like there's like this really important combination of like practical experience and general kind of knowledge or like theoretical expertise that you may have as an engineer. So it's like you may think this to be true, but you don't really know if it's true until you test it. And then that's where like the athlete or working with like somebody who might be a subject matter expert can come in and say yes or no, because there's probably some nuance there. Like you just said, like taping up your socks. Like a lot of people might
Yeah.
not know how to even do that. There's probably like a subtle technique on how to tape your sock in the right way, when you're playing soccer. Or if you're an athlete, you might be really particular and you like to do it a certain way. It doesn't mean it's right or it's wrong, but just like understanding those nuances is I think sometimes really important in making a product really desirable.
Yeah, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation because you don't, as like a creative team, you don't want to be in a vacuum, right? Of, okay, this is the problem we should solve. And then you go full steam ahead and do it like anything else. Like if you don't kind of have credible athletes that you're designing for in that space to kind of check it. But at the same time, sometimes people don't know what could unlock their performance until you show them, right? So if you're always just saying, okay, well, what should we do now? People are referencing the things that they're familiar with. And so it's a bit of both. It's like, can we, from kind of a technology side or a creative side, try something and then try it on athletes and kind of see what they think and see if it affects performance and kind of almost like change what they thought was possible versus, going too far in the wrong direction. So it's a balance.
Yeah, that's awesome. Bearwear. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? This is your own brand. What inspired the creation of it? And where are you at with it currently? And where do you kind of see the future of Bearwear going?
It was a capstone project in engineering. So it
Okay.
was, like I said, I did mechanical, but by my fourth year, knew I wanted to do sports. I had tailored some classes accordingly because there are some sports engineering programs in the world. So I tried to do it as similarly as I could. And then I did 2 capstone courses and they were both kind of wellness type products just to be as close as I could. So it was me and 2 of my classmates and friends, and one of the 3 of us had scoliosis and had I wear orthotics as well, but hers were a little bit more critical in that it was for considerable alignment change and she needed to wear them all the time, but wanted to get back into yoga. So she was putting her orthotics into closed-toed shoes, like a running shoe, which is what is kind of designed for an orthotic to go into, but not great for yoga.
Yeah.
You have the stiff sole and you have the hard heel counter. And so that was kind of the formation of the problem statement, I guess, problem definition phase. So it came out of that. So once we were done class, we had a proof of concept that was how to securely attach the orthotic underfoot, but it was using, a combination of like a sock that we purchased, like a non-slip type of sock and strap placement. So things that were cobbled together. So it was a proof of functionality, but not a unique prototype or fabrication. Where was I at this time? I had married or was about to marry a farmer in Saskatchewan. So I knew I was like rooted here a little bit, but wanted to do sports engineering and still was like fairly confident, I guess, that I would, which I'm very glad that it worked out. But for a while I was kind of sitting in a farmhouse in
You're like, where am
rural
I going?
Saskatchewan. Yeah, being like, okay. I was doing some research. I was working with Professor Ma, as I mentioned, doing some contract research with different brands, but it felt pretty far away. And I figured, okay, there's this bearwear that we've progressed quite a bit. My other 2 classmates, they went off and did other things. And so it was like, well, this is a fairly good vehicle to learn everything I could learn and almost treat it like a master's in product realization within this industry that I want to be in. So as you can imagine, not a very high paying job, but really good learning experience for all aspects. And I'm kind of glad in my current role. I wouldn't say I like all aspects of having to be a one-person company. And I appreciate the product creation part of it so much more than I appreciate having to sell it. So that helps me narrow my focus a bit. But yeah, it was everything from basically how do you make something that is not what you buy on the shelf. So how do you kind of find a development partner? What's that process of I was working with a company or like a factory overseas. So what's that translation process of a product? And then how do you get it here? What's your packaging? What are all the requirements to, cross
Mhm.
borders and sell things? And so it was just like, it was so much. So I'm super proud of getting it across the line. But in terms of what's the future of it, it's not my main focus right now. It's definitely on the back burner with my full-time job and family, but it's something I'm really proud of in the sense of kind of unlocking or solving a problem for people who really need it. So I'm proud of it in that sense. But again, right now I'm in the phase of having to market it and sell it, and I don't have a lot of creative juice left at the end of the day to want to do that. That part's the least comfortable for me. I really believe in it. I love that it works well, and I've gotten feedback from people that it really works. So that's where I get my joy. I was just at the Canadian Podiatry Conference a few weeks ago and met with a lot of podiatrists who were really keen on it. And that to me feels like kind of the most genuine approach of the people who are making the orthotics. If they're loving it, great. And if they recommend it to people, I'll keep making them.
Mhm.
But I think for now, I'm pretty engaged in my current role at Arc'teryx. There's not a huge growth plan right now.
Yeah. No, and that's totally fair. I feel like you have a very interesting brain. Like you have this analytical side, but you're also have this entrepreneurship side as well. But maybe the business side of marketing and all that can be a little bit tough. But I think developing footwear for people who use orthotics is really interesting and probably comes with a lot of unique challenges too along the way. And I'm just curious, what have you learned just from that process?
So the footwear is basically the attachment point between anyone's existing support. So orthotic, an off-the-shelf
Mhm.
type of support. Luckily, kind of wasn't going deep into the science of creating the support itself, but it was more about, I mean, it's the same kind of process as what I would do now, which is like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Kind of one of the things I'm hoping to share at Memo is like, what is this process as a sports engineer? It's like, okay, what is the problem? What are elements then that you need to include to be able to meet certain objectives? What are the constraints to any kind of human-centered design process? Then methods of make, I guess, is another specific one. And then testing. So the quality testing, like, it doesn't have a hard outsole, but the sole material, how long can that withstand on what type of surfaces? How many times can it go through the wash? Like, how is it going to degrade? What kind of
Yeah.
materials? We used recycled polyester. So how does that perform? It's not a super high performing product in terms of, it's not an ultralight running shoe upper or something, but it's still an active product. So it needs to kind of wick moisture. So it was stepping through all that. And then we did some testing just to make sure that it was holding it in place. We did a little bit of biomechanics. It's kind of full circle because I'm really interested in markerless motion capture right now. But at the time, I had built this little markerless lab to do some simple biomechanics, and we used it for this. You kind of always draw from different aspects of your experience that you don't expect. But so did a little bit of motion capture that was looking at squatting and then walking around in between, and then doing more squatting and walking around and comparing the support from the same orthotic between shoes, barefoot, and then in the binding, just to kind of make sure that even with that moving, you're getting that same correction. So it wasn't about, is this the right correction? Because we weren't designing the orthotic, but it was, is it staying underfoot? And did a little bit of stuff with thermal cameras. How much more is it allowing heat to escape rather than a running shoe? So we did some testing. So really, it's funny to look back and see how much of that really is what I'm doing now. I mean, now I have access to more tools and resources, and can have partnerships with university. Like, there's this more at the disposal of these companies, but the process is the same. And oftentimes having to kind of create the tools you need if they don't exist is the same.
To talk about innovation a little bit, because it sounds like you've been focused on innovating in a whole bunch of different ways, whether it's through Bearwear or Adidas or Arc'teryx. And to me, as an outsider, a shoe is a shoe or a glove is a glove. And I'm just kind of curious to know more about like what the ultimate goal is within the success of what innovation looks like. And is there a certain point where maximum innovation is reached? Do you think you can blow by that on certain products? Like, are there certain products where you're like, I think we haven't even scratched the surface yet of what this thing is capable of? Is that exciting to you? Or do you feel like most things like this, maybe a product that you're working on has reached kind of like near saturation point in terms of what you can do and how to push that product?
Yeah, it sometimes feels like that. I know that's come up before in some meetings I've been in where you're like, I think this is it. This is the ceiling. This is the saturation. And then, sometimes there still is this like real step change. You think about like running shoes, right? They've gotten higher performing, and then, super shoes, critical foam, like for certain types of racing, just like made this kind of step change. Same thing in like, swimsuits. Like there's certain technologies that have been around for a really long time, and then all of a sudden there's still this breakthrough. So it's one of the challenges within innovation teams, definitely to feel like there's still that room to push. I think you can also kind of get into these races along the same path. So like, for example, in the supercritical foam, it's like, okay, who can now create the newest foam composition, and everyone's kind of running in that same direction. Sometimes the biggest innovations come from just taking a totally different approach and going a totally different way. And so the process can be innovative, not necessarily just the outcome. The input can be innovative, not just the output. So I think that's true for things like, sustainability. It could be even more high performance and super sustainable. That would be amazing. But it could also be equally high performing and way more sustainable. That can be a real step change. So I think anytime something just really moves the needle and solves a problem better or in a totally different way and makes people rethink, kind of what I was talking about with athletes, like makes you rethink what is possible, I think that's innovative. I do think that looking at underserved athletes also opens up a totally new space, because then you rethink everything that feels saturated, because you have a different subject that moves differently and has different physiology and different needs. And so that's what's exciting to me about all the work that I have done in women's, is like, okay, even though we have great footwear, is it great footwear if we consider how she moves or what her body is optimal for, and how can we enhance that in a different way? And there's such a gap still in terms of not only the research there, but I think what can be done to best serve her. So I think that would be my approach. When things feel saturated, it's like, okay, how can you look at this through, even if it's the same challenge, like through a lens of somebody totally different, and like, would you get to a different answer?
And do you have a focus on specific underserved populations? Is it women primarily, or are there other underserved populations that come to mind too that you're trying to design for or engineer for, I should say?
Yeah, most of my work has been in women's. There definitely are other communities that have been the focus of different projects that I've been around. But yeah, most of my work primarily is in women, and then also, expanding that kind of beyond the binary. I think looking at like, what does it mean to create sex differentiated product versus women's product? Yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Is there any belief or principle that helps guide your work? Maybe even when things become difficult as you're in like the process or the testing stage. Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
I'm really inspired by the work for women. So that one always keeps me energized. I think similarly, stuff around sustainability feels really important. So I've been lucky, I think, kind of as I mentioned before, the companies I've been with it feels like the values also align to what I value. So it's easier to feel excited about it. I think in general also, I really like to help people. I like to feel like I'm making kind of impact in the world, and my expertise is in kind of sports and product. And so sometimes that feels like, oh, I want to do more, but I do think that being active is such a important thing in somebody's life and keeps them healthy. And then sports can be such a unifier. So in general, I really believe that sports is such a force for good. And then in terms of like Arc'teryx, like being out in nature, exploring the mountains, accomplishing this kind of personal feat, like all of those things are so positive that contributing to that, even though sometimes it feels a little bit tangent to it in terms of like the product, but ultimately, the goal is that the product enhances these activities or gets somebody new into the mountains or onto the field. So yeah, that's kind of the big picture, is like, I think that this is contributing to a force for good.
I love that.
Awesome.
I think that's so important. Something that's really important to LMNO and to Memo is this idea of sustainability as well. And we define that here as people, planet, and profit. And when people ask us what sustainability is, that's what we tell them. Most people go to this idea of green or like carbon neutrality or something that's like lowering greenhouse gases and things like that. I'm just curious for your own, well, for our audience, but for your own kind of definition or viewpoint of what sustainability is. Could you just define that and just let us know like what sustainability means to maybe you, but
That's a
like
tough one.
what that is to Arc'teryx maybe or Adidas? Because I would love to be able to teach people more about what that is so that they can learn that it's not just about tree planting.
Yeah, I mean, I liked yours. I think that in the context of product, we also kind of think about it in terms of like, carbon emissions and neutrality. And I'm super proud of Arc'teryx's stance, I guess, in that space. It makes sense that, brands in this outdoor industry, they love the outdoors and they want to protect the planet. but it's been really impressive to see the value that Arc'teryx places on trying to do the best that they can and get better all the time. Because obviously, as product companies, you're creating product, and that has a detriment. And so just how do you continue to evolve and get to a really good place? So sustainability in the context of my work is often in that, but I think that you make a good point in terms of valuing people and having, overall kind of like balance be sustainable, relationships be sustainable. I think it's a buzzword a little bit, but it's things that can continue in a way for a long time without having a negative penalties, something that you can be long lasting and hopefully, good for people and worlds. I'm happy that it's something I get to focus on.
It is kind of buzzwordy, but I think there's this resurgence of the word sustainability, and I think it's sort of redefining itself or manifesting itself differently in a whole bunch of different companies and brands and things. So I'm kind of happy that it is. But at the end of the day, it's just about making stuff that lasts for a really long time.
Sustain, and you can, like you said, you can do it. You can create something that is, let's say very, very recyclable or biodegradable and lasts for, a short amount of time, or you can create something that is kind of maybe less, the end of life is less, but it lasts, you use one thing for your whole life. So there's definitely different tiers. I guess best case scenario is it lasts a really long time and then it has a really conscious end of life option. So that's, I think hopefully where companies are headed.
Awesome. Well, I think we have time for a couple more questions, and maybe just want to ask a question about you as Gillian, because I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who might just want to know about the creator and the person behind all these great things that you're talking about. You've created a lot of change. You've done a lot of great stuff, had attention towards underserved communities and populations. I'm just curious, for you, what do you do yourself to make sure that you're feeling energized? What are some of the non-negotiables in your day?
I wish I was so disciplined in that sense. I try and be active as much as I can. That was something that was a real gift being at Adidas, because the campus was based around sports fields and a big gym, and it was really integrated into the day. So that was something that I miss a little bit. I was really, really grateful for. And so, trying to build that in now is a little bit trickier, but trying to kind of get some sort of exercise in. Trying to get a little bit of meditation in, some quiet time if I can. That's one that I don't always make space for, but I'm really interested in learning more about techniques and trying to really prioritize that, because I think it helps a lot. And then, family. I got a little 2-year-old and a husband who's busy doing his own stuff. So it's a lot of juggling, but just trying to make sure that the energy and time that I spend over a year, I think I've actually done the math of where are all my hours going, and does that reflect the things that I value? Because I love my job and I'm happy to pour energy into it, and obviously I love my family, but it's sometimes easy to feel like you're dealing in your own time chips, but you can also be dealing in other people. So trying to just kind of keep an eye on having a good cash flow, I guess, across areas of my life. And then, creatively, I love to play music. So if I'm ever feeling stuck or bored, I guess I like to write music. My job is very creative, and it requires a lot of kind of thinking outside the box. And so sometimes doing creative pursuits outside of that feels a lot. I like to watch NFL football, have lazy Sundays. I like to kind of just crash sometimes and try and reset more than I'm looking for additional creative outlets.
Well, thanks, Gillian. We really appreciate you coming on here and speaking more about your work experience, your life experience. A question that we're asking all guests on the Memo podcast is, if you could write a memo to a younger version of yourself, what would you say?
I think my answer is kind of cliche to this one, but I honestly think about it often, because what I would say to the younger version is that everything will be okay. And I think about it often because I try and imagine a future version of myself would probably tell me the same thing. And so it's easy for me to say in hindsight, and really hard for me to kind of believe in the present. I, believe in that because it has been okay so far. And, not that every moment always is okay and you go through challenges, but I think that if you have, resiliency and new ideas that you're open to pursuing, and you're okay with things failing, and you have good relationships, and you try and be a good person, and you have a pretty good outlook on different situations, then you're going to make that path okay. I think those skills will allow you to see the best in the situation. So then how could it not be okay? So I really, really try to live by that. I definitely would have told my former self, and it probably would have saved me a lot of stress along the way. So I'm trying to do better.
That's great. I don't think that's a cliche at all. I think that's great advice and probably words to live by for a lot of us, because there's a lot of anxiety and people struggling with their mental health, and if they just remember that everything's going to be okay, that's going to get them through whatever tough time they're going through. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Gillian.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Memo Podcast. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you guys.